In this video, I'm going to go over how to build a truss using your scale drawing. So first you want a piece of foam board that we're going to tape our drawing to. I would recommend making copies of your drawing, or if you're using the original, then you're going to also need some wax paper. So if you're using copies, I would make 2 copies because you're going to need to do 2 sides of your truss. If you're using the original, then you'll do this twice using different pieces of wax paper. So the first thing we want to do is go ahead and tape our drawing to our foam board. So that way it won't move around while we're working. Then, because this is my original, I'm then going to take a piece of wax paper and lay it on top. And this is going to prevent ruining my drawing. So when I'm putting glue or putting my pieces of wood down, it's not going to destroy my original drawing. And you're going to tape that down as well. I would tape all 4 sides of your wax paper so it won't move. One of the important things that I want to point out is that I'm using the example that we did together as a class to show you how to build the truss. You will be using the scale drawings of your original designs that you did in the last activity to build. The next thing we can do is we're going to actually lay our pieces of wood right on top of our drawing after we cut them. All of my pieces were 1/8 inch pieces. So when I lay it on top, it lays directly on top of my drawing. If you used the quarter size pieces, it would be exactly the same, but they should be a little thicker in your drawing. Now, since this is to scale, we're going to use our drawing to actually measure and mark our pieces. So if I line it up with the end here, I then can take a pencil and mark exactly where I want to cut it. It is better, you want to be as accurate as possible, but it would be better for it to be a little bit long than for it to be short, because you can always sand it down or trim it. We then have this handy little tool. This is called a chopper that we can use to cut our balsa wood. A couple things that are really important is the blade in here is extremely sharp, so you never want to put your fingers anywhere close to the blade. Also, when you carry it, make sure the blade is completely down and you're carrying it from the sides. Do not carry it from the handle. I have had some students that have accidentally picked it up and have cut themselves, so be very careful. And then when you're ready to trim, you'll see that the middle is kind of marked under here to line up my piece of wood where I want it to cut. And again, it's better for you to trim it a little bit long, and I can move these out of the way, than for you to trim it too short. So I'm going to trim it a little bit long to start, and then I'll show you how you can go back and then sand it to the right length. You should see it's very easy for it to cut, but it may also not cut it completely straight. So that's also why you may want to cut it a little, just slightly long, so that way you can sand it so that it's nice and smooth. So then if I line it up, I can see that it's a little bit long. If I take sandpaper, you want to be careful with balsa wood because it'll sand very quickly. And so it's really easy to sand off too much, and then you'll need a different piece. One of the things to note when you're looking at the different types of sandpaper, the higher the number, the finer the grain of sand, which means that it'll take off less material. So the lower the number, so if this was like number 40 sandpaper, it's going to be a coarser grain and it's going to sand the material faster. Just be aware of that. Then you may want to sand a little and then reline it back up to see if it's about where you want it. Once you have it exactly how you want, then we're going to pin it to the board to hold it in place while I'm cutting some of the other pieces before I glue them. In order to pin it, you're going to use these straight pins, and you don't want to put the pin through the middle of the board because then it's going to compromise the strength of the board because you're basically putting a hole through the middle of it. So what you'll do instead is you're going to put the pins directly beside the piece of wood. So you'd put one on the top of it and then another one on the bottom. And I put them like where you don't need a ton of them. It's really just so that if you were to pick it up or somebody were to bump it, your pieces aren't going to go flying everywhere. So as you can see, if I try to wiggle that board, it's in there pretty sturdy. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut, and I'm going to do the outside of my truss to start, and then I'll come back and then do the inside pieces. Now when I put in this piece, you'll notice that it's a pretty snug fit, which is perfect because the tighter it fits and the less gaps I have, the stronger my truss is going to be in the end. So my goal is to use the least amount of glue possible. Now, at this point, I have two choices. I can either go ahead and finish cutting out all my pieces so I have them all and then come back and glue it, or I could go ahead and start gluing it. A lot of times I like to get all my pieces and then just come back and add the glue. You're going to use a wood glue, and when you glue it, I would take out the piece. You could use a toothpick or something small to put glue on your pieces, and then reset the piece. You may have to take the pins out, put it back in place, and then add your pins. And then you definitely want to go back and wipe off any excess glue, because the more glue that you have on it, the heavier your truss will be, which will affect the structural efficiency of it. So you want to use enough glue that it's going to hold together, but you don't want to have excess glue. So once you have your sides done, I have another example to show. Once you have your sides done, so let's say this is what one of my sides of my truss looks like. You need to make another one that's identical to it, because then what we're going to end up doing is attaching these two. So standing them up and then adding the pieces to the top or the bottom of the truss and to the end of the truss. And then what you'll do is once you have that, you can actually then use a piece of tape to hold it together while it's drying. So here's another example. This one has already been broken, but as you can imagine, originally, this side of the truss was exactly the same as the other side of the truss. Once those two sides were created, then they went back and added the connectors on the top and the bottom and on each of the sides. It's important to note that you want to be as accurate as possible, not only when drawing your scale drawings, since that's what we'll be using to build your trusses, but also when you're building your truss, to pay attention to eliminate as many of the gaps and to make sure that you don't have a bunch of excess glue to make your truss stronger and have a better structural efficiency. You will also leave your truss connected to your board to dry at least overnight. So then you want to make sure that it's completely dry before you remove it from your foam board.